In this episode of Health and Wealth, the Biostock podcast, I have the pleasure of being in the studio with Renée Aguiar-Lucander, actually former CEO of Calliditas. Welcome, Renée.
Thank you.
So, diving into this conversation, I would very much like to know, who is Renée Aguiar-Lucander?
So Renée Aguiar-Lucander, I was born up in Dalarna, moved down to Skåne when I was still quite young. So grew up in Skåne and then went to Stockholm School of Economics. And after that spent maybe a couple of years working in Sweden, working with actually when options and futures were first introduced in Europe. I actually worked in the company that started selling analytical systems for that. So I worked a lot with brokers and programmers, et cetera, to try and actually teach the whole kind of community about kind of analytics on options and futures trading. So I did that, and after that I moved with that company to a couple of different places, to Switzerland, to France, to London, I was US, I was with them for quite a while. But after that I basically went to INSEAD to do my MBA, and then I entered into the finance world. So I spent about 12 years in investment banking, spent another 12 years on the investment side, investing in life sciences. And then ended up at Calliditas as CEO from 2017.
That is quite a journey. So what brought you into the finance world to begin with? What was the basic interest that you had that led you to want to go into that world?
So I think actually when I went to Stockholm School of Economics, it was always finance that I was actually most interested in. And I was reasonably good at it. So that was that helped. And so I think but I've also been always very interested in kind of new things, pioneering, new kind of adventures. So actually the whole kind of options and futures, when they kind of was really the first time when OMX actually kind of opened, or it was called OM at the time, when they kind of started trading, that I found that really fascinating. And it also, I've always kind of been interested in kind of international exposure. I've always kind of wanted to kind of travel and work in different places. So to me, that was kind of a perfect combination. But I think in terms of after having worked in that for a while, because that was obviously quite entrepreneurial, we ended up kind of building a fairly big business across Europe. And I ended up kind of running different kind of operations in different countries. I just kind of felt like I wanted to kind of try a little bit more of a project-based work. And that's really kind of why I went into investment banking. You get this kind of enormous exposure to all kinds of different really, really interesting companies. So instead of being with one company, you really get to kind of see and work with, lots of different teams, lots of different businesses. And I really kind of felt like that's something that I wanted to kind of try out. So that was really one of the reasons why I went to investment banking, originally from kind of having been at a corporate for about 5 years.
So somewhat of an explorer and into the innovation already then.
Yeah.
And then being fairly young, I would assume then, at that point, and going into the sort of male-dominated world of finance or investment banking, working at Lehman Brothers, for example. How was that for you at that age?
So actually I started out working in the US. I worked for a company called Alex Brown, which at the time was called one of the Four Horsemen. There was Hambrecht and Quist, there was Montgomery, there was Alex Brown, etc. So there was this was during the time when actually we were taking, it was the first boom of kind of the tech world. So, Alex Brown took Sun public, Microsoft public, took AOL public. So this was really kind of, the beginning of a huge revolution in terms of, tech companies really kind of, dominating a lot of the kind of financial markets and building big businesses on the back of it. But I think obviously in terms of working there, it was very male-dominated, and particularly in the US at the time, the work ethic there is a little bit different than what you might find in Sweden. So we spent a lot of nights sleeping under our desks, since there was no point in going home. If you only have a couple of hours, then, you try and kind of just get whatever sleep you can. And it was also kind of interesting in terms of I became the very first kind of managing director that was female, kind of at Lehman in terms of there was one female managing director down in Italy, and I became the first one in London. And even at Alex Brown, when we became kind of more senior there, becoming pregnant, there was kind of a big kind of just a silence in terms of like, we've never had anyone actually be a professional who actually became, we've never had a woman in this kind of rank. And so there was a little bit of like, well, you're going to have to write the policy because we don't have one, because it's never happened. So I think there were quite a lot of those kind of situations where you ended up kind of being the first one who's ever kind of done some of these things. On the flip side, I think, it is I guess unique can mean bad things and good things, but I think obviously, people knew who you were, at least. And also I think it was a great camaraderie, and I think, I had a lot of really, really good male mentors who I think really kind of helped me in my career and really kind of, were very supportive. But of course, there are also kind of people who find it really difficult to work with you. They really don't want to work with you. So of course it happened that, I was staffed on a project to then subsequently be taken off a project because the managing director refused to work with a woman. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but I would say overall, I think it was a great experience, and I think you do learn to read people fairly well, and I think you learn how to manage kind of different people in different ways depending on kind of how their attitude, how it is towards you. And so I think you learn to kind of probably be a pretty good people person reader. And I also think you learn to pick your battles. You can only do so many things. So you have to pick your battles carefully and make sure that you pick the ones that you can win.
And so, gender equality in general, hugely debated, of course, especially when it comes to boards and so on. What would be your best advice to other women wanting to sort of, do the same kind of journey as you have done?
So I think that it really does mean that I think you cannot rely on the system, because usually the system is pretty warped. So I think you can't kind of expect that you're going to get the same call as your neighbors are going to get, who are men. I think you have to work in a different way. I think you have to decide maybe kind of where do I want to go, who do I want to work with, which company might I kind of want to be involved with, and I think you just have to do it yourself. You have to call people, build a network, talk to people, try and get recommendations. So I would just say, don't think that there's a system that's going to include you, that someone's going to kind of show up and give you a call. I don't think so. I think you just have to set out your own journey and your own strategy and then kind of try to execute on it.
So don't expect any help from anyone else. Do you offer other people help then?
I certainly try to. And I think it's been one of the things that I've been trying to do throughout my career. I've always kind of had women in my team. I've always had a very diversified team. It's also funny because even when I was kind of, in the investment banking world, whether by, maybe I shouldn't be so cynical and say that it was planned, but it may very well have been. But of course, I ended up with a lot of diverse candidates in my team that were placed in my team. Okay. And I think that it was actually great because I think we really had a very strong culture and a very strong goal of what we wanted to achieve. And I think a little bit of that, we kind of knew that we had to achieve it against the odds rather than with the odds. And I think it made all of us really better bankers and better people. And so I think I've always tried to, be aware of kind of the benefits and the really leverage kind of diversity in a very positive way. But at the end of the day, you have to build a company or an organization and a team based on merit, right? But within that kind of context of saying, this is a meritocracy, we're going to get the best people, I think you can throw your net kind of a little bit wider. And lo and behold, you'll find a lot of people who are extremely competent who also might add to the team in other ways. than just their competence. So I think you have to be a little bit open-minded and throw that net a little bit wider and be more supportive. So I think that I hope that if people were to ask people who worked for me or in kind of the teams that we built in the company, et cetera, I hope that they would all say that I am very supportive in terms of that aspect in general.
Mm. And I mean, Calliditas has made a fantastic growth journey. How many employees were there in the company when you were appointed in 2017 versus now?
So I think there were about 9, some consultants, some employees, etc. But it was a very small team because obviously the company had been working, really for a long time, very steadfastly on trying to kind of, craft a way forward in IgA nephropathy, which is a rare kidney disease. But really the issue was that there was no regulatory pathway. And so there wasn't really any basis for having a large team or really kind of starting anything until there was a resolution really around the regulatory pathway forward. And that really was kind of generated by the team kind of in early 2017. So when I came, it was a fairly small team, and really the task was to build a team that was able to kind of really conduct a global phase 3 trial, pretty large global phase 3 trial, and also then really set the strategy for the business as to not just the trial, but what was the ultimate goal of the business? Where did we want to get to? What was actually the kind of strategy of the company? So that's really kind of when I came in. It was very small. Today we're probably over 250 people. More people based in the U.S. We have a huge relatively for this company. It's kind of a big kind of commercial presence in the field. So over 100 people kind of in the field in the U.S. And so it's really kind of gone through quite a transformation from a very small team of people on Wallingatan in Stockholm to a much more kind of international business, really, that's kind of integrated from discovery all the way to commercial. Mm.
So you've been part of breaking new ground, you could say, within the finance world, and you are breaking new ground with. You have been breaking new ground with Calliditas, also bringing novel treatment to people with renal disease and with a huge medical need, of course. I would say I can imagine it hasn't been a straightforward journey at all times. What would you say have been the biggest challenges during this? During these years?
So I think that actually I would say that, starting out, I would actually say that in terms of in the first kind of part of my career, which really was the kind of corporate kind of entrepreneurial business, I think that was really my first introduction to really kind of building an organization and building a team. And interestingly, again, I think it was my first introduction also to kind of like what I was going to kind of face. Because I was a woman rather than a man. I took that job. I was originally going to be a salesperson. I'd been in the job for about 2 weeks when the actual founder and owner of the company called me and informed me that there had been a mistake.
Okay.
And he said that, no, we don't actually hire women in these positions. I wasn't aware that you were a woman. I'm very sorry, but you're terminated. So that was really kind of my beginning of that career.
Wow.
But actually, I convinced him that he should at least come and meet me face to face and we could have a conversation about this. And this is really, I think, the beginning of trying to kind of, how do you try and turn these things into positive situations instead of negative situations? And lo and behold, after we had met and had a conversation, he allowed me to actually keep the job. And I then actually ended up, rising quite far in the organization and building quite a, kind of a high profile in the organization as such. So I think there are ways of overcoming it. So I think, has it all been easy? No. I think investment banking was never easy. I think that there's a story that I've told before, which I think is kind of crowning achievement on that. Is actually I was nominated to be a managing director at Lehman. And as I said, I was the only kind of female in the investment banking group that year who was kind of becoming a managing director. But of course, during the meeting when you're supposed to meet and greet the senior, the very kind of senior people of the organization, and there's a big kind of dinner and it's a big kind of celebration for all the managing directors in the whole organization, in all the different kind of parts, they walk steadfastly up to my husband and shakes his hand and says, "Congratulations."
It's
which
like
is
a movie
charming.
scene.
Yeah. So I think that there are kind of some of those things, but it can make you kind of be really upset and angry, but you can also just kind of take it and say, well, it's kind of what you get for choosing some of these kind of areas, which are, because I think people are not always they don't do it on purpose. I don't think they're just not used to it. And so I think that is something which kind of falls upon you as well as a person trying to kind of pave some of these routes for other people, is that, you have to try and keep your cool and calm and explain to people a little bit of maybe how it feels to be in that situation, and make them aware of how it's perceived. And I think that's always been kind of quite helpful. And actually I would say that going on the investment side, there are also very, very few women at that time. This was in 2008, 2009. Very few women were kind of investment partners. And so again, I think I've always been attracted to some of these kind of more difficult kind of situations, but I think that you also get a lot back from these roles, because if you can create kind of a culture or a team or a platform, it really gives a lot back. It really gives you a lot back. And so I think that's kind of it is a challenge, and it isn't easy, and I think you do go home and yell and scream at the walls and think that the world is unfair, and it's not, things aren't going, things should have been different. But on the other hand, I think that the victories are so much sweeter, and I think you also see how all of these things have developed over time. Now there's so many more women in investment banking, so many more kind of women in investing roles. It's becoming much more kind of established, and which is great. And so I think, even if you haven't personally kind of been involved in all of those journeys, you kind of feel partly connected to all of that success. And I think that, generally, I believe that, diversity in its broadest definition, not just kind of women and men, but, generally I think, it contributes to, to better performance. It really does. And so I think that, for me, I think the challenges are difficult and tricky. But again, I think that when you actually succeed and you actually kind of realize that you've overcome some of these things, it's extremely rewarding.
I can imagine coming out from that conversation you had when you had originally been terminated and then ending up keeping your job. That must have been a sweet victory.
Yes.
An early one. Also very curious as to how you argued for your cause there. Is there something you can reveal?
So I think actually we had a long conversation when he came, but he also actually, because he was Australian, this gentleman, and so he said that, well, we'll go out and have I'm assuming this was half jokingly, but you never know. He said, we'll go out and have dinner and some drinks, and let's see who stands up at the end of the night.
Oh, right. And that was you.
And I was a lot younger than he was at the time. And I had spent a lot of time just in the kind of university world. So I was fairly well trained, I think, at the time. So I think that at least I definitely stood up at the end of that dinner. So at least I think we found kind of a mutual kind of joke around that kind of situation, which I think ultimately, I think it made him feel more comfortable that actually he could he could joke, he could talk about whatever he wanted to talk about. He could have a so-called normal dinner with me without it being weird or awkward or strange. And he didn't have to change his behavior. He didn't have to change who he was. And I think ultimately, I would say it's probably that more than anything, that he actually kind of said that maybe he could live with it. And if he could live with it, maybe other kind of traders and other kind of people might be able to live with it as well.
So basically you actually showed him that you are actually a person, not just a woman.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's really great that he came to his senses there. Coming from the finance world, you mentioned that you were on the investment side in life science as well, but how did you first get in contact with Calliditas?
So as I had been in the kind of investment world for quite a long time in life sciences, I had the privilege of meeting quite a lot of other investors on boards. I was on quite a lot of different boards, a lot of different circumstances. And one of the people that I met was actually Lennart, who was at the time head of Industrifonden. And so he was one of a couple of people who actually contacted me, as it was then known in the industry that I was kind of stepping down from Omega Funds, which was the fund that I had previously been with for many years. And so he contacted me and basically kind of asked if I would take a look at a company that he had in his portfolio. And there were actually a couple of different investors who called me during that time. So I had the privilege of traveling around looking at some different companies in different kind of jurisdictions, with a view to then maybe taking on and being helpful on some of these investments. And when I saw this one in particular, you spend a lot of time in investment in life sciences, and one of the things you learn over the years is obviously there are very, very few investments that actually make it to patients. It's less than 10% of all clinical kind of trials that actually lead to kind of a product. And the vast majority of these are still kind of really happens within big pharma. So from a small biotech kind of perspective, it's few and far between. Yeah. But this, I think, actually had all the components that actually could get to patients. And I thought that was super exciting. It had the components both in terms of the type of substance, the regulatory pathway. It was really kind of going to be the first ever approval potentially in this indication. And it was a very kind of strong relationship also with the patient group. And I think there was a real kind of willingness from the regulators, I think, to try and do something in a space which had seen extremely poor kind of innovation over a long time. So I think that all of these things together, I just kind of felt like, this really could get to patients. And I thought that was so important.
So we're speaking about breaking new ground, and also you then having a knack for seeing challenges as something positive, maybe, because the regulatory pathway in this indication was far from easy, right?
Yes. So the FDA division, the cardiorenal division, had really required, had quite a high bar in order to kind of give an approval for drugs, which would require, very high number of patients, very long kind of studies to kind of get there. And obviously in rare diseases, that's really kind of, pretty much impossible to do. So from that perspective, you'd seen very, very few therapeutics reach the market in the renal industry over the last 20 years. So if you take away kind of the transplantation and dialysis kind of area, therapeutically, patients with CKDs had very, very few new and novel kind of medications to help them. But I think there's been a kind of a growing pressure, obviously, on the FDA from a lot of key opinion leaders, from industry, from patient organizations, that something has to give. You have to kind of try and find a way to get medications to patients.
Did you bring them a solution then?
So I think the company had worked for a long time actually in this kind of IgA nephropathy, had worked with a lot of US universities, worked with interest groups in kind of the kidney space, and actually we did this big kind of analysis of all kind of interventions in this kind of indication, collected all the patient data, did a huge amount of statistical analysis, talked to lots of different kind of companies to try and collect this data, get access to it, worked with, great statisticians to try to kind of find a way. So it was really kind of this publication of a peer-reviewed journal, of that analysis that showed that there was a correlation between something called reduction in proteinuria, so reduction of the protein in your urine, and the actual kind of underlying kidney function. So that's really was on that basis that the company, again, we could kind of go to the FDA and say, we've shown that there is this correlation. Would you be willing to allow us to run a pivotal trial in this rare disease with this kind of novel endpoint of reduction of proteinuria, with a view to then potentially getting a kind of an accelerated approval? Obviously, you'd still have to continue to run the trial. You'd have to have that long-term data to ultimately get a full approval and show that actually the drug does have a benefit on the underlying kind of disease. But it would give you an opportunity to, you know, really kind of raise capital for a trial that would be, you know, reasonable and rational. And it'll give you an opportunity to potentially then get this medication to market in a much shorter, you know, kind of on a shorter term basis. So, and that's really what the FDA agreed to in 2017, and said that they would allow the company to do that. And that really kind of opened up the whole kind of investment opportunity in renal on a much broader basis, and has led to, you know, really kind of quite a huge revolution in kind of, you know, the renal space, which is fantastic.
Meaning lots more investments are made in that area.
Yes.
Basically. So you did get the FDA approval after about 4 years after you were appointed as CEO. How did that feel?
That felt amazing. I really think that was amazing, and I think that it was, and I think because also, you know, we were a small Swedish company. I think there was a lot of investors, a lot of people are saying, oh, you know, you're never going to get this, you know, yes, you might kind of, you know, pave the way, but someone else is going to be kind of the victor here. It's not going to be you, you're not going to get it. And it was really kind of, it was an unknown. This was the very first time that the agency really was kind of assessing it, and they had to kind of establish their own view on kind of how are they going to assess this, because obviously we were not the only ones then. Other people had been following our lead, so they knew that they were going to get other drugs, other kind of companies also coming to them asking for an accelerated approval. So this really was the first time that the agency had to try and set their own kind of internal rules for how they're going to deal with this. So clearly it was kind of uncertainties all the way around. But I think that when I think our data was very strong. I think we had a very kind of, had a well-prepared, very good package into the FDA. I think we'd spent a huge amount of time trying to kind of really provide high-quality analysis and information to them. So, we were as confident as we could be, but it was a very kind of, it was a lot of uncertainty as to how the agency would look at this and how they would interpret it.
And then uncertainty in general is something that investors are not very keen on. So how much did your background in finance and as an investor help you during this time to finance the company?
I think that actually it helped quite a lot. I think it helped in the way that I understand very well kind of how the investor community thinks. How do they assess risk? What do they need to see in order to kind of at least convince them to take the time to do the analysis, to do the kind of, to undertake the diligence. So I think I know, I understand the mindset, I understand the process, I understand kind of what they need and what they want. I think that was extremely helpful. I also think that obviously I had my own kind of personal network to some extent that I could also leverage to try and get introductions to people that I wanted to kind of get in front of. And I also think I had a very good understanding of how incredibly important communication and the story really is, the strategy, and how you really have to think about that, well in advance, and that you have to have that consistency in terms of what really, what is the goal, ultimate goal of this kind of venture? Where do you really want to get to? How long is that going to potentially take? What is it going to cost? So that you have a real idea yourself, not just of like what does it take to get to the next step, but what does it really take to get to something that's going to be a value inflection point? Because that's obviously what the investors want to know. What is in it for them? When are they going to be able to get some returns here? And I think understanding that whole kind of process, I think, was very helpful. And I think is helpful for anyone that has any ambitions to build a business in the life sciences industry. Biology is difficult, it's complicated, it's a lot of unknowns. But on top of that, I think you really, really have to think about the message, the story, the communication, the consistency of any interaction with investors, and understand, what is in it for the investors? Why should they kind of invest in this? And the answer is not because it's a great molecule.
So the equity story, the importance of the equity story, that's something that's discussed quite often, and you mentioned it as well. What would you then consider to be the key elements in that equity story that you need to have in place in order to sort of hook investors?
I mean, I think you need to understand the therapeutic area on a global basis extremely well. You have to understand what is exactly the differentiation. What is your key USP that's going to kind of enable you to actually kind of find a place in this market? So I think it really is about differentiation. And that differentiation can be 100 different things, right? But I think you have to really focus on, you know, what is it that makes this so different from anything else out there? What are the real benefits, both from a kind of patient perspective? You know, is it safety? Is it efficacy? I mean, what kind of efficacy over, you know, is it time? Is it, I mean, it's like there's so many different ways you can cut things, obviously, to kind of look at it. But I think you have to really kind of say that, you know, this is my real estate. This is what I am going to occupy. This is where we can dominate. This is truly kind of the benefit of this solution. And I think to do that, you really have to have a good idea of you know, the entire landscape that you're going to play in. And so I think that's kind of where you need to start. And I think that's what you need to kind of be confident about, and you need to do all the work that leads you up to being able to prove that that's the case.
So I was speaking to someone in the US investment banking area, and they actually said that Nordic companies in particular are not very good at being confident in the way you describe. They usually, the way they can differentiate is with great science. If they have great science, they can comment on the fact that they have good science, but they're not very good at selling themselves. Would you agree to that?
I would probably agree to that. I would agree to that. I think that it's also quite interesting if you go to if you have an opportunity to kind of listen to some of the US kind of CEOs in terms of how they pitch when they actually kind of pitch their company. You know, a lot of things, I mean, certainly a lot of kind of Nordics will say that they're overplaying things, they're being overconfident, they're overstating kind of their, you know, what they can do. But it's a cultural issue, right? I mean, obviously, you can't say things that are untrue. And you have to keep a kind of a moral compass and an ethic, you know, an ethical kind of thinking about this, because you are dealing, I mean, this is a highly regulated industry, and you have to kind of really think about what you're saying. On the other hand, there is this kind of benefit of kind of painting a picture of what it could look like if everything goes according to plan. And I think a lot of times in the Nordic, everyone wants to be so incredibly transparent and so kind of sure that they're not overstating anything, that they'll tell you all the problems about, you know, why we may not make it there. Whilst on the other hand, you'll have, you know, someone from the US telling you all of the things that's going to look great when you do get there. So I think that there is a kind of an inbred kind of cultural part in the Nordics in the way that people feel that they have to be completely honest and truthful and, you know, very kind of data driven, which can be fantastic, obviously, kind of in many aspects that kind of will be, you know, a great asset. But I think in terms of telling a story and you know, getting people behind you and wanting to kind of drive towards something, that, you know, that often is not enough.
No. Yeah, just to remember then to keep within the boundaries of truth. Otherwise, you might end up on Netflix.
Yeah.
So courage is obviously a good trait to have, especially when breaking new ground. What does courage mean to you?
Courage, I think, to me is to be true to your own convictions, really. And to kind of stick by what you think is right. Even in the face of kind of whether there are other authorities or other people or, you know, disagreements or, you know, whatever it might be. So I think that is courage, to stand up for what you believe in, to stand up, you know, kind of again in the face of maybe not everybody agreeing with you, and maybe even standing up against someone who might be in a kind of more senior position than you are. Or at least believe that they are in a more senior position than you are. So I think that is courage. I also think that you have to, courage I think is also to kind of be very clear and transparent and take responsibility. Because I mean, if you're basically going to point and say, you know, this is what we're going to do, this is where we're going, you also have to basically going to take the consequence of the fact that you may not be right all the time. And I think courage is also therefore to admit when you actually need to kind of, you know, change course or adapt or do something different, and learn from that. But I think that is also courage in a way, to be clear and honest and transparent, because I think that breeds respect. If you're asking people to follow you, if you're asking people to believe in where you're going and go with you, it takes courage to kind of stand up and point in that direction and ask everybody to follow you. But again, I think courage also means you have to take the consequences, and be respectful for everyone that's actually following you, and you know, be clear about what happened, have them be part of it, and you know, and just kind of build that culture of respect as you also go forward.
And then transitioning into the meaning of true leadership, what do you think has been the most challenging part of leading a company like Calliditas through the growth journey that you've been on?
So I think in terms of the most challenging parts, I think is really when you have some of these times, you have some of these kind of situations where, you know, the vast majority of the organization is not really aware of where, you know, that there might be some issues, and you're not completely sure either of whether you're actually going to pull this off or not. So I think it's quite challenging in those kind of things. It can be quite lonely, it can be quite stressful, because those are the times when you just have to kind of fix it yourself, or fix it with a very small group of people around you, because there's no benefit in kind of, you know, sharing that broadly with the organization until you actually kind of have the answer to, you know, where are we going to go, what's going to be the kind of message. So I think there are some of those kind of defining times, either when you're kind of raising capital, or when you have to restructure a team, or when you have to change kind of strategy, or when you're dealing with a third party such as a regulator, or, you know, someone else, when actually, you know, you don't have control over that situation. And, you know, you've done everything you can and you're kind of sitting there waiting for, you know, was that enough? So I think some of those times, I think can be extremely challenging, but it's challenging because, you know that, you know, you let so many other people down if that doesn't go according to plan. And, you know, no one wants to do that. If you can help it, you don't want to do that. And so I think that's really kind of, you know, the bigger the organization, the more you do, the more you build. You know, obviously you take responsibility for a lot of people's livelihoods and careers, and you know, you want to do a really good job, and you want to be really responsible for that. And so that can be challenging at times when there are things that you cannot control.
Yeah, you mentioned those defining moments. What would you say have been as you can remember, the most defining moments during the journey with Calliditas for you?
I mean, I think, you know, to start with, obviously, you know, taking the company public and raising the capital to run the trial, that was obviously very defining, because without that, you know, the company would never really kind of have taken off. So I think the fact that we managed to do that and actually kind of run that clinical trial, you know, in a very professional way, I think was a defining moment. I also think, obviously, when you're getting the data from a phase 3 trial, I mean, everyone will tell you that, you know, you lose about 10 years of your life before you know what the answer is. You know, did you hit your endpoint or not? You know, was it a successful trial or not? So that is clearly kind of a very defining moment as well. I think that the final kind of really defining moment was, obviously, you know, we've done all of this, we've gotten all this way. I mean, were we going to get that accelerated approval or not? And I think that was clearly, you know, a huge kind of, you know, milestone for the company. And that really enabled us to that really gave us access to patients. And we could really, for once, actually kind of tell patients that here is a drug that we have specifically designed to target the origin of this disease. You know, this really has something that has the potential of being disease modifying. And that was like such an amazing time. And I think the whole company just kind of, that you can actually get to that point and get that kind of accelerated approval and really realize that, you've really done something. The whole organization has done something that really is going to benefit these patients. I think nothing is better than that.
That must be, a really great feeling and sort of peak in your career, perhaps. On the other hand, has there been moments when you felt like this is not going to work? Has it ever felt like, pitch black?
No.
That's great.
No.
That's great.
I don't have that gene. No. I think there's always light in the tunnel. There's always something that you can do. There's always something that you can, I think you always have to have plan A, B, and C. It's only if you don't have plans B and C that you might feel like things are pitch black. You should always have, lots of different plans. That there's always something to do. There's always somewhere to go.
Yeah, that's great. Speaking of somewhere to go, I mean, during the times when you were financing it, you were partly financing the company with selling off rights to regions. But you kept the rights for the US region to yourselves and focused on the US. Was that sort of always the strategy to aim for the US market?
It was actually. It was the strategy that I set, kind of day one really as I kind of entered the company. I was very clear about the fact that had to be the kind of goal of the company. And it was kind of an unusual strategy. I think there were a lot of people who thought that was not the right strategy and didn't agree with me in the broader community. But that's fine. But I think that was definitely kind of the strategy from day one.
Mm. And I mean, there are obviously, it's a huge market, hugely competitive as well, and lots of hurdles to get in there. What would be your best advice to other companies that would like to aim for the US?
So I think they're pretty obvious. I mean, I think first of all you have to start really early, and you have to really you have to travel there. You have to be there. You have to talk to people in the market. You have to kind of really understand your own therapeutic area and the companies who are kind of actively pursuing solutions that are similar to yours or in the same kind of therapeutic area, so that you really can map out kind of what the landscape looks like, both kind of near and kind of near, medium, kind of long term. I think that you have to get someone in the U.S. who can be your partner in the U.S. And I think it's super important kind of like who that person is. I think you should take your time to really kind of find someone who will fit both culturally as well as kind of provide you with experience and expertise.
Network.
Yeah, network in that market. I also think you really have to kind of find support in U.S. investors. It's going to be virtually impossible to just drive kind of with with Scandinavian or European kind of investor base. So again, that requires a lot of travel. You have to spend time. You have to go and meet investors over and over and over again. But they have to become familiar with you, with the team, with the product, with the project. But I think that the benefit is obviously it is a lot of work, but it's a one market. When you do get approval, you can access that market immediately, and it's a full kind of market access. And yes, you need to have a lot of people around you with a lot of broader expertise, both in medical affairs, in market access, in commercial, in marketing. All of that's required, and you have to build that team as you kind of go. But it's not as if Europe is that much easier, quite honestly. No.
I would say that listening to, having seen the journey and listening to what you're telling us here, is that there needs to be a fundamental, very, very strong driving force beneath everything that sort of makes you get up in the morning. What's your personal driving force?
I think it comes again from, I have this kind of thing of, I can do. And I'm very used to being in the position when everybody tells me, like, that can't be done or you can't do that. And And I think that's really what kind of gets me up in the morning is I can do quite a lot of different things actually. So I think it's that, and I think it's actually just the people around you. I think what I love to kind of build organizations and teams. I've always built teams from my very kind of first kind of job. It's just the size of the team might be a little bit different, but building that team and seeing other people kind of grow and take charge and develop. And I mean, I think it's a fantastic situation. It's almost like having more children in the world, right? You can only have so many children, and obviously my own children I love deeply and in a completely different way. But I think having kind of some of these teams around you that you can kind of nurture and help and coach and see them develop is very different. But it kind of gives you that it's a very rewarding thing to do. And I think that kind of gets me up in the morning as well. And so I think it's that kind of combination of, doing something different, doing something new, trying to kind of, break new ground or pioneer something or change something that's not right. I think all of those things, is a driving force. And I think in life sciences, ultimately, the fact that you can actually kind of be involved in something where you're helping all of these different people with a drug that's actually hopefully going to, this drug can keep these people hopefully out of dialysis and transplantation. I mean, that is amazing. Which other kind of job would you ever be able to kind of say that you can actually make a difference to, a lot of young people and have a really positive impact hopefully on their lives? I mean, that's a privilege, right? It's a huge privilege. So I mean, if you can't get out of bed for that, I don't know why you'd get out of bed. So I think ultimately that's kind of where you want to get to. But in the meanwhile, obviously, you have all of these other things that you can kind of, that drives you kind of on that journey. But that is ultimately, obviously, I think the driving force. Which is important, and I think you have to have that kind of connection. I think in terms of what's the ultimate goal, and I also don't think it doesn't mean that every single company needs to kind of market their own drug. Obviously not. There are plenty of kind of companies out there to partner with and do deals with, but ultimately you want your drug to kind of come to market and be a benefit to people. And so I think that that should be something that I think should get you out of bed.
Well, you also mentioned deal making, and obviously Calliditas has struck a quite big deal with Asahi Kasei. Was it 11 billion Swedish?
Yeah, just over 11 billion, yeah.
Yeah, that's also money, like we like to say.
Yeah.
Money in itself is a huge factor when developing a new drug, financing the company and so on. How much of a driving force is money for you personally?
So I think money is a driving force in terms of, getting to the point when you can have a comfortable, you can do the things that you would like to do. In life. I think that's a privilege. So I think that money is certainly kind of a driving factor. But I don't think that money has ever been kind of the driving factor from that perspective. But money, like everything else, like this transaction, I mean, it is part of kind of having that sweet victory of being right or getting something right or changing something. It's kind of an objective, to some extent, it's an objective measure of, are you doing well or are you not doing well? Are you getting it right or are you getting it wrong? And it's the same thing, whether you're a salesperson and you win some kind of award, well, you're doing something right, right? So I think money has always been kind of in this society some kind of objective measure of success. And so I think it's important to kind of keep it in mind. You can't ignore it. It is important. It's important to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. But I don't think that it's necessarily kind of, certainly it's never been my kind of driving force to kind of achieve, the highest amount of money per se. But as I said, I think it is kind of objectively something that, it makes the world go around. And if, certainly if you don't have money, that makes life very difficult. So I think from that perspective, it's important. And I think it's important that you also kind of embrace that, because, this is one of the things as well, I think, in the Nordic countries, we don't really celebrate our successes as much as we kind of talk about, when things go wrong. I think we should celebrate our successes more. I think people should be proud about what they achieve. I think they should be proud for other people when they achieve great things. I think there's a little bit of a jantelag, a little bit of like, did they really deserve that? Or, and I think I wish that could change. I think we should have a much more kind of supportive and positive view on when things go right, when people kind of, succeed, particularly in a sector which is inherently so incredibly complicated and difficult, and biology in itself is so difficult to get right. And we have to try again, and a lot of times, most of it's going to fail. So I think that everyone deserves better than having people kind of snipe at them if they do well. So I think from that perspective, I think we should celebrate more often, be more positive, and I think that'll support people more and make us, I think we'll do better.
So what do you do when you want to celebrate?
So actually we try to celebrate a lot in Calliditas. We have a fridge full of champagne every single day. And we try to find ways of actually kind of celebrating together and when we, even small victories. And I think it's important. So personally, I'm not a great kind of champagne drinker, actually.
More
beer? For people who know me, I'm a Chardonnay person.
All right.
But I think in terms of celebrating, I think you do that with your team. I think you celebrate with your family. I think you share what you've kind of done with your family. And I think that's kind of how you celebrate. You go and do something that you've always kind of wanted to maybe do. You get something special, you do something nice, whatever. But I think more importantly, I think you share it with other people, which actually is what at the end of the day, feels a lot better. Lasts for a lot longer. Yeah,
so I can imagine there was quite a lot of celebration after the deal was struck. Then, how long did it take from first contact with the taker to the deal was done?
So it's probably about 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah. So we had kind of been in contact, gotten to know each other in different conferences. We kind of met up. They would come and get an update at different conferences, etc. So 1.5 to 2 years is kind of when we had been in contact and been aware of each other. So it's like most of these deals, they rarely happen, I think, overnight. A lot of times people want to get to follow the company for a bit. It's a bit like investors as well. They want to follow you. They want to say, if you say you're going to do X, did you do X? And so I think there is that kind of consistency of delivering and results, and that people kind of want to see before they make a decision.
Who sought up who?
The company was not kind of soliciting an exit or kind of driving any kind of exit process. So these kind of it was definitely unsolicited. But obviously, you go to a lot of conferences, you meet a lot of companies, and as part of that, you get to know a lot of the companies in the sector who may or may not have an interest to do something with you further down the road.
So even though it was not sort of an active strategy, doing an exit in this shape, was that sort of a long-term goal still from the owner's perspectives or from the management's perspective?
I think that's at the end of the day. When you ask for money, when you ask somebody else to put money into the company, there has to be an expectation of a return. As a management team, we work for the shareholders. We always work for the shareholders. And the ultimate kind of goal of the shareholders is to make a return on their investment. Now, they can do that in many different ways. As a public company, you can buy and sell shares, etc. But ultimately, I think that, this is the shareholders' decision. And I think in this case, as we saw, I think there was broad kind of support amongst all the shareholders that this was a very good deal. And so I think from that perspective, I don't think that you can, as a management team, have as a kind of selling the company is not a strategy, right? You can't have, to me, that's not a strategy. I think you have to kind of have a strategy that means that you're building value over time, you're achieving something, and you're delivering value to all your stakeholders. But obviously, when you get kind of an offer like this with a high premium and something where your shareholders are happy to kind of take that, that clearly is a success.
How did it feel for you then personally as a CEO of the company? Did you feel, obviously now you have stepped down from November 1st.
Yeah.
Did it feel sad in any way, or did you feel like, well, this is one chapter now, it's time for another chapter?
I think as a CEO, you're always very kind of engaged in the business on a day-to-day basis. And so obviously we had our own kind of medium and long-term plans that we were executing on. And so I think it's always a little bit bittersweet because you have your own kind of view of how you want to build a business and what you're going to do. And I think the business was on a fantastic trajectory, both kind of, revenue-wise, profitability-wise. So I think we had a very clear kind of strategy going forward, irrespective. But as I said, on the other hand, this is clearly a successful outcome. And as that, I think, you really should be very proud as a CEO having been able to take the company, to this kind of end, because, you've really created value. You have created value for all the stakeholders, for everyone in the company that had shares or options. You have your shareholders. I think it's also kind of this is a good kind of positive signal for the whole kind of sector, right? Again, we have to celebrate our successes, and I think this is a successful outcome. And so, at some point in time, you have to, I'll have to find something else to kind of break barriers somewhere else or do something different, find something else that's difficult to do at some point.
Speaking of that, what are your short-term plans now going forward?
Well, my short-term plans is at the moment I'm in a transition and kind of hand over some of the things kind of with the company, which I'll probably do up until kind of the end of the year. And I have some commitments that I've taken on that I'm going to fulfill until the end of the year. And after that, I think I'd like to take a little bit of time off, actually, which would be nice. And maybe start thinking about what's next. But I don't actually have any particular plans for what's next. But I'll have to see. It's always a little bit of a combination of a strategy and an opportunistic or a little bit of luck. So we'll see what next year might bring.
Would you consider going into as it was then fairly early stage company again to start a new building journey?
It's very complicated to do that from the beginning. I'm not sure I have the energy to do all of that again. I'd probably want to come in a little bit later, maybe, but or maybe from my clinical perspective, it was late. So that I think it's a good time to come in around kind of a phase 2B kind of situation anyway. Because I'm probably more of a late stage person than an early stage person. So I think that, we'll see how I feel after I've taken some time off, how much energy I feel like I have and how long I feel like I want to commit to another journey. But so we'll see.
Whatever it'll be, I'm sure it's going to be an interesting one. So speaking about getting towards the end then, our time is running out, but I would like to ask you first, Christmas is coming up. Someone whispered to me that you have a knack for singing snapsvisor, schnapps songs. What's your favorite one?
Probably Inbelipet och så lunkar vi så småningom. Those are probably my two favorites.
Bellman's always nice.
Yes.
It has been a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we could have gone on for another hour without problems, but I'd like to say thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure.
And good luck with whatever the future brings.
Thank you.